Netflix just dropped the first 5 episodes of The Mole Season 2, and at this point, I'm 100% certain that I've nailed it in using my strategy from Season 1 and also just observation on how things work. But I want to show you guys why I think what I think and see if you guys are on the same track as I am. I binge watched the first 5 episodes and took all of my notes, and we're gonna go through this right here, right now, and when the next few episodes release, we'll see if we're correct. Let's dive right into episode 1. A leader needs to be chosen, and this leader could potentially be replaced by one of the intruders. This immediately makes me think that production isn't going to allow the mole to be in that position because there's a possibility they could be replaced. Then we don't have a mole. So this makes me think that there's no possible way Niche is the mole because he ends up being that person. However, having been on the mole before, I know how much control production actually has over these types of situations, and I'm thinking in my mind, these intruders could just be people that are hired by production and they're just allowing all of the contestants to hit them with the paintball guns, knowing that there's no possibility that they're entering the show. On the contrary, I also know that there are legitimate alternates that do fly out and have the possibility of going on the show if something were to happen to one of the contestants. Are these intruders 5 alternates? Are they really actually trying to get on the show? I don't know, but this made me take Niche off my list. I am not suspicious of Niche. He is not the mole. During mission 1, it's pretty successful. My only question is, who nominated Andy to shoot? Because I feel like there's a lot of people who could have done a really good job at shooting, and I would have liked to see the conversation of how they came to the conclusion that Andy was the one to be nominated to shoot. And also, Andy did a great job hitting his targets, but I'm still just curious how that conversation went, and not being able to see it as a viewer, I kind of was like, how am I supposed to tell who's suspicious here? However, seeing that Ryan was in the position with 1 bullet left and had the opportunity to gain the group's trust, I think it's kind of the perfect way to start the show as the mole. In season 1, Cassie was the mole and the exact same thing happened. She was able to save the day and it made everyone trust her. So I'm thinking Ryan could be the mole because this is the perfect way to get everyone to trust you. A lot of people were suspicious of group 1 because they didn't hit any of their targets, but honestly, that looked really hard. And having been on the mole before, I know that there are specific parts of missions that are destined to fail. Jen says that she trusts in Tony and Hannah, and I think that this scene was purposefully set and placed into the show to throw some suspicion on Hannah and Tony. It's something that I've seen before where they'll take one-liners and use them basically to make the viewer suspicious of a person that's not suspicious. So seeing so early on that a line was used, I'm suspicious of Tony and Hannah, makes me not suspicious of Tony or Hannah. And then we see an interview where Muna is talking about how hard the quiz is gonna be, but the way that she says it is so suspicious. Like, this quiz is gonna be so hard. And it just reminded me of exactly how Cassie was on our show. When you see her in these interviews, she's like, I have no idea. And it's like this almost over-exaggerated, like, bad acting. And that right there made me so suspicious of Muna. Okay, surprise, surprise. Muna takes the money in the phone call mission, and she's the first person to have sabotaged or taken any money from the pot. So now my ears are perked up. Muna is definitely on my radar. So Muna is on my radar and Ryan is on my radar. Now we go on to episode 2, and Niche takes leadership and is getting his group kind of lost in the forest. Tony is getting annoyed, and remember guys, I think that these sort of things happen on purpose and production lets them happen. They let people go astray so that they look suspicious, which confirms this is 2 strikes against Niche in favor of not being the mole, because they wouldn't allow the mole to just kind of run around like crazy and look super suspicious to everyone. I think that they're allowing Niche to kind of guide people astray so that he does look suspicious to the rest of the players. Now, as I'm watching Andy and Deanna build this raft, their reactions and their interactions seem super genuine. Watching how emotional they're getting over this entire thing is making me absolutely take them off of my radar. I'm not suspicious of either of them at this point. Flash forward to them actually getting the raft in the water. It's my hunch from knowing how production works that once the raft is in the water, the mole wouldn't sabotage. So Andy says something to the extent of, I think someone could have pushed one of those barrels out. I don't think the mole would do that because it would be super obvious and the raft is already struggling as it is. I think the sabotage would happen in the building of the raft. I think the sabotage would happen in possibly the finding of the treasure or trying to bring the clues back to the surface. And ultimately, they're successful in their mission. So like, is the mole a shy person that's scared to sabotage? Because at this point, the mole's not doing so hot. Either that or they're waiting for their chance to do something extremely drastic. And that's what we're about to talk about. Now, one thing about the production of this show is that they tend to not talk about the mole too much because they want the viewer to be genuinely shocked and surprised when they find out who the mole really is. So we don't really see people talking about Sean, and production isn't really highlighting or talking about him very much, even though he is doing a couple things that are not really on par. And this makes me more suspicious of Sean. So Sean is now moving up on my list. He's on my radar as a potential mole. Now we enter in the countdown for the money. Tony says the pot's gonna go to 0 and no one's gonna get the exemption. And I love that he said this because it really put the pressure on and made people realize that they might just be sitting there watching the pot go to 0 and no one's gonna get the exemption. So I think a lot of people started to get up at that point, and I loved that he said that. That to me did not seem like mole behavior, which made me take Tony off my list right then and there at that time. And guys, you have to remember, it's not the mole's job to drain the pot to 0. It's just the mole's job to stick around for just long enough for the money to go down. Q getting so angry in this moment made me take him immediately off my list. It is not Q. He seems way too genuine and way too angry for him to be the mole. Sean leaving after 15K is right at that mid-ground sweet spot, exactly where I would guess the mole to be at. Ryan leaves at 20K and Muna leaves at 25K. These 3 people are top of my list, most suspicious, and they're definitely at that perfect midpoint sweet spot for the mole to have taken money out of the pot, but not be the #1 contributor to pulling money out, which kind of takes the heat off of their back a little bit. Now we see that Andy is really suspicious of Tony, and Andy goes home. So the mole is not Tony or Hannah. Now we enter into episode 3, where Sean nominates himself in the car to be the person that operates the best under pressure. And he knows he operates well under pressure because he's an undercover cop, which we're about to find out very soon. So Mike finds the safe in his room, Muna finds the safe in her room, and people are saying that they're suspicious because they found the safe. I'm not suspicious of that. I think if 2 people can find it in 2 separate rooms, it's not so outlandish to find the safe in general. If you guys notice, there is a poker chip in one of the rooms, and we know that the mole is notorious for hiding secret hidden clues throughout the show. So I think that this might be a moment in which we shed some light on Melissa, who's also going very slow, struggling to get down the side of the building. And is this one of those hidden clues where she could potentially be the mole the whole time and we're just now finding out about her? This puts Melissa on my radar and definitely as a suspect for the mole. As I'm watching these interactions, them trying to figure out what's going on and how to open the safe, Sean is so quiet. In the other room, Ryan votes to open up the clue, which is exactly the perfect sabotage for the mole. If you can just take a little bit of money out of the pot but make it seem like you're helping people, it's the perfect sabotage, and Kasi did this so many times on season 1. Back in Sean's room, he agrees to the final code, which ends up not being the correct code, and I'm like, yeah, of course he would be like, yeah, go ahead and enter that, knowing that it's not the right code if he's the mole. Sean also says that he doesn't trust Q, which is weird because Q is the entire reason that they figured out how to find the numbers on the safe with the flashlight. Everyone was disregarding him and not paying attention to him, and Q's like, no, there's something with this flashlight, and he actually figures it out, which also makes me not suspicious of Q at all. He's being helpful, he seems genuine, he's trying really hard, and there's just absolutely no way that Q is the mole. Now we enter the mission with a round table fortune cookie, and we have to figure out who has an exemption and who has money. In this mission, we found out that Sean is a bad liar, and And also, he didn't really try very hard to lie, which makes me a little bit more suspicious of him because if he's the mole, he doesn't really need the exemption. At the same time, if he's the mole, wouldn't he be trying harder to lie so that he can keep money out of the pot? I don't know. I think it was the perfect timing to make sure that people knew and saw that he was a bad liar. I also saw that Mike seemed genuinely happy that the exemptions were getting found out. So if he is a player and not the mole, he would be very happy that people aren't exempt and he has a better chance of making it to the next round because he has more people that could potentially do worse than him on the quiz. Watching his facial reactions made me less suspicious of him, even though he's found to be a pretty good liar because he's actually the one that has the exemption. I think if the mole had the exemption, they'd obviously be trying to lie, but they wouldn't want to give their cards away and show to the group how great of a liar they are. In a strange way, this actually makes me less suspicious of Michael, but it doesn't take him completely off of the list for me. Now let's talk about the theater mission in which they can use $5,000 from the pot to watch someone's strategy on how they would play as the mole. But Ryan ends up watching Sean's video, and production would know that Sean is an undercover cop, and they would absolutely want whoever the mole is to reveal this information so that other people are suspicious and word starts getting around, and Sean now seems like a major suspect because he's hiding an entire identity. And this really takes the heat off of Ryan. So from a production standpoint, I think they would want to call a lot of attention to someone who's not the mole, but has a big secret that they're hiding. And they do this a lot in the show as a whole. They call attention to people who are not suspicious by utilizing the information that they have in the background. So this makes me extremely, I am very, very, very suspicious of Ryan now because she's one of the people that's revealing this big information that Sean's an undercover cop. But is production double bluffing us? Are they thinking maybe the viewers would think we would never cast an undercover cop as the mole? And that's precisely the reason that they would. So Sean and Ryan still high on my list. At this point, guys, we are halfway through episode 4 and I am tunnel vision dead set that it's Ryan for multiple reasons. And one of those reasons is the fact that she definitely is sabotaging and they're not calling a lot of attention to it. Also, no one watched Ryan's video, so it's very clear to me that the cast is being duped by her, and production is very, very good at this. They make sure that attention is not called to the mole and that the people who are playing the game are not suspicious of this person. Remember, off camera, they are privately interviewing each player to ask them where their head is at, how they're feeling, who they're suspicious of, and if production catches wind that one of the players is suspicious of the actual mole, they will do everything that they can to figure out how to steer that person away from the truth. And they did that with me, Pranav, and multiple other players on the show. This all happens off camera. So now we enter the waiter-waitress mission where they each have to communicate with each other to try and dwindle down the people who have $10,000 in their gift. Ryan is at tables 9 and 10. One of the $10,000 donors is at table 9 and she lies about what they're eating. A very small thing that Hannah ends up observing, not telling Tony about, and then Tony ends up going home. We also see Sean purposefully sabotage in front of Michael, but Michael kind of spots out the purposeful sabotage, and still Michael is suspicious of Sean. And I'll say as well that sometimes a double bluff is the strongest play for a mole to have. We saw this with Cassie in season 1. She said that she did something on purpose to make people suspicious of her, when in reality she was just sabotaging. So it's definitely, you know, still a play that could happen. Either way, Ryan and Sean are both high on my radar, but I think it's really interesting that no one else is really suspicious of Ryan here. Most people are still suspicious of Sean. And even though Ryan is my top suspect at this point, I feel like Watching her during the elimination, she seemed genuinely very nervous. Watching her look at her screen, like her face was red. It seemed like she was genuinely nervous about going home. So I don't know if that was just nerves because she thought people were sussing her out, nerves because she genuinely might have been going home because she's not the mole, or what. But if you think about it, when have we seen who Ryan thinks the mole is? We haven't. And that is very telling for me. So going into episode 5, I'm trying not to be tunnel vision. I'm still dead set that it's Ryan. And watching her sabotage again and again, and just the viewpoint from production, I really do think it's either Sean or Ryan. Moving on to episode 5, we see that the contestants have voted for Muna and Sean and Michael as their top mole suspects. And we also see Muna's reaction to people saying that they voted for her, and she seems genuinely happy. She's like, yes, people are voting for me. And this wasn't just what she said. I was watching her facial reactions. However, editing, they can always make it look like something it's not, but she does seem genuinely happy that people are suspicious of her, which makes me not suspicious of her. A lot of people say that they voted for Muna, which is actually what people do when they're trying to hold their cards close to their chest. Maybe 1 or 2 people voted for Muna, but I don't think that the majority of people voted for her. I mean, we know this, but it's pretty obvious that everyone's lying. And the fact that people are trying to say that they didn't vote for Sean, that people voted for Sean the least, also makes me think that there were a significant amount of people that did vote for Sean. But something that makes me less suspicious of Sean is how hard he was trying with the cargo. He was trying so hard to shift around the money and make people think that he had voted for Muna when he knew that he had voted for Michael. Like, it just seemed like he was trying way too hard to actually be the mole. The mole would just allow people to kind of do what they're gonna do. As long as not all of the money was in the right person's truck, the mole would have been happy either way. I don't like these types of missions because the mole can basically just sit back and let people sabotage themselves. And this is stuff that gets cut from conversation, especially when the viewer is watching. They're not gonna show the mole making a suggestion, and they're also not really gonna show the actual outcome of a suggestion that the mole has. They're just gonna let people do what they do, and the mole can sit back and watch everyone argue. And then it's revealed that most people think that it's Michael, which makes me think it's not Michael. The person who always seems the most suspicious that most people are going for usually is not the mole. Now we enter into the bidding war, the auction, and we see that every single person has said no to the dossiers. They've said no to a correction, and they're kind of holding out for this exemption, which is totally understandable because exemptions are so powerful in this game. Now, if we remember back to when Joy voted $25,000 for an exemption on season 1, Joy ended up not being the mole, and she just really was that desperate for an exemption. Somebody bid $59,500, which was the entire pot. And we don't actually see who that person was, but I can tell you for a fact that person is not the mole. So as of right now, episodes 1 through 5 from a former mole player, my #1 suspect is Ryan. Let me know if you guys agree in the comments section below. And what do you guys think about Sean? What do you think about Michael? And who do you think is gonna win this whole thing? Who has the best gameplay? Who has the best strategy? Let me know below, and I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive and prediction for Who is the Mole Season 2. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe and like this video if you liked it, and I'll see you guys next time.